I was a happy-go-lucky boy going to elementary school. And in 1940, right after I turned 9 years old, the Germans invaded Holland. Until then, I knew nothing about anything that was going on politically or militarily in the world. People talk about, the late 30s and stuff. I was totally unaware of what was going on. Uh, I was made aware of what was happening at that time when I went to school one morning and the teacher told all of us to go home and stay there until further notice because we were at war. And I didn't even know what war was all about. But anyway, I went home and I told my mom, and she started crying because my mom was an adult during World War One, and so she knew war was not funny. Holland was a neutral country, like Sweden and Switzerland. But if you look at the map of Europe, its location and its with England, no way that the Germans were going to allow that coastline to go unprotected. So the Dutch military wasn't very much. I don't know how long they say the war lasted, but it lasted about as long as it took the German forces to walk across the country. It didn't bother me very much. I noticed that, it was kind of, to us kids, watching the German soldiers march with their metal-studded boots. And then we didn't have blacktop streets. All of our streets were cobblestone. So the sound was just deafening, and we enjoyed that. But then we went back to school, and slowly things started to happen. Uh, the persecution of the Jews started small but kind of early. And I didn't even know I was a Jew. I had aunts and uncles and cousins that were Jews because they went to the synagogue, and I thought that's what it meant to be a Jew. Nothing about my forefathers. Well, my dad was a full-blooded Jew. Both my grandfathers, parents on my father's side were Jews. On my mother's side, my grandfather was a Jew. So under Jewish law, I'm a Gentile because my mom was a Gentile, because my grandma was a Gentile. But under the Nuremberg law, the German law, uh, if you have 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents, you're a full-blooded Jew, regardless of who they are. And so I qualified, and my family qualified, except my mom as a full-blooded Jew. So so when it came to prosecuting Jews, we were in line. The the first thing that really happened to our family when they had the first razzia, and that's when the Germans went with trucks through the streets of Amsterdam and rounded up Jewish men of working age. And people ask me, well, how did they know they were Jew? Well, in Holland at the time, it was not a very diversified population. we Most Dutch were either blondes or redheads. And if you saw somebody with black hair, there was a 99% chance you're looking at a Jew. We had no Hispanics. We had no African Americans. And so my brother was caught up in that. And what they did, they took him to a processing place, and if they could prove they were not a Jew, they'd let him go. But my brother ended up at Auschwitz. He was 8 years older than I am. And and then things, started to get worse. The next thing I knew, we had the teacher gave me an envelope to take home and give to my mom. Well, of course, in those days, we were, as kids were not so rule abiding, but and the envelopes didn't have that good adhesive on them, so our little pocket knife and a little spit open of the envelope, and inside was a piece of cloth with two yellow stars on it, and a note that said that I was to wear one of those on my outer garments on my left chest. Uh, but then it stated that failure to do so was punishable by death. So that kind of got me, and I took it home to Mom, and she opened the envelope again, and she uh, she started crying again, but nevertheless she put one of them on my jacket, and it's funny that that particular star survived. It's hanging right here in the museum. So the following day, I went to school, and we had about 30 kids in our class, and there were only two of us with the star, a little girl and myself. The little girl didn't survive the war, but uh, funny thing happened. The class bully, they had those in those days. Uh, he asked me where he could get one of those stars, and I realized that later on he didn't want one. But anyway, then they started the uh, banning all Jewish kids from public schools, and they took one small school in Amsterdam. I don't remember the name of it, but it became known as the Jew School, and it was nothing but Jewish kids. And that's where I met Anne Frank. The Of course, she was just a girl then; she wasn't famous. Uh, Her and her older sister, once or twice a week, they would go after school to their dad's place of business and go home with him later. Well, me and a lot of other kids lived in that neighborhood where he had his business. And so we'd walk as a group, and that's how I got to associate with him. Uh, I wasn't too interested in it. She was a little older than me, about a year and a half, I think. I'm not sure, but her older sister was a real nice lady. But Anne was what we'd call today a tomboy. She didn't play with dolls or anything. She played in the streets soccer with the guys. But anyway, and then things got worse and worse and worse, and they banned all of the places of enjoyment in the country, uh, the parks, swimming pools, ballparks, you know. Uh, and after that, they even put the stores off limits. And what they did in each neighborhood, they took one mom and pop store and allowed it once a week to close early and then open up again and sell to Jews. And the first time that happened, uh, my mom took me with her to the grocery store. And when we got there was a sign in the window, and it says, no Jews allowed when humans are on the premises. And so Mom saw that, and I saw it, and she never took me to the store again. But then people that have read these Anne Frank diary or seen the movie, they went into hiding when her older sister was notified to report to the railroad station for what they called relocation. By then, we knew you're going to the camps. My dad got such a notice. It was just a postcard several months before that. And he looked at that and he said, well, they already got one of my sons and one of my daughters. He said, I'm not going to go. My oldest sister, she was an interpreter, and she was in Belgium at the time the war broke out with a group of British Farm Bureau people. And we had hoped that they'd take her with them to England, but they didn't. The Germans got what happened to her, we don't know. But the my dad disappeared, but at the time there was no organized underground for helping the Jews. But I want to say right now that we were fortunate to be in Holland because the population in general were very protective of the Jews. They hide them in their homes, in their cellars, and everything. While in other parts of Europe, it was just the opposite. They didn't want nothing to do with them. But my dad would come home on weekends to have dinner with the family. Well, that didn't work out too well because after about 2 or 3 weeks, on Sunday afternoon, he was home for dinner, and I went outside to play with my friends, and four men in uniform showed up at the house, and they were inside, and they came back out with my dad. And so I went over there to talk to him, but they wouldn't let me near him. And they marched him down the street. Those guys were all bigger than him, much bigger, and he looked so puny between those four guys. And I watched him walk down the street. And that's the last time I saw my dad. He ended up at Bergen-Belsen. Oh, my dad was a gymnastics instructor, but he also did some work for representing the government at events and stuff like that. But basically, he was a gymnastics instructor. His name was Elijah, and he was not a big man. He was maybe an inch taller than me, but he was a slender man. And my younger sister had been at the junior colleges. It was a junior college in the northern part of Holland where they taught gymnastics instructors, sports managers, and stuff like that. And of course, when the schools were off limits, they kicked her out. And so they took my dad away, and not long after that, my mom got what was left. It was my younger sister, who, well, actually, she's 6 years older than me, but she was the younger of the two girls. And Mom said, she said, it's time for us to disappear. And she had it all planned out. She had saved some paper grocery bags, and she put some necessities in there. And then one Wednesday afternoon, that was the afternoon that the store was allowed to sell these, we left the apartment and walked down the street with those paper bags, hoping people would think we had been grocery shopping. If we took a suitcase, everybody knew what we were doing. But she took us to one of the canal houses, small one, and it had been vacant for as long as I remember. And that's where she took us. And we went inside, and the stairs had already been tore out, but there was a homemade ladder there, and we went up to the attic. There was two stores in the attic, and up in the attic there was nothing there. It was just a tile roof, the red tile roof, or even some of the tile were missing. There's no water, no heat, no toilet facilities, and we weren't the first ones up there. There were others up there that were relatives of mine, and but we were the only kids. And so my sister turned to me. She said, this is not going to work. I was 11 by then. The She said, you had to be totally quiet up here. They have to depend on people, bring food, bring water, haul out the garbage and stuff. So she talked to Mom. She said, why don't you let me take Andy to the northern part of Holland, where I used to go to, where she went to school. So he said that's the farm part of Holland. If you look at the map of Holland, in the northern part, there's very few cities. But in the central and southern part, there's cities. And the dividing line is what used to be the Zuiderzee, which is better known as the IJsselmeer. And she said, we can live there among the farms. And she talked Mama into it. And we went to the Amsterdam harbor that night, and they have ships going across the lake. It's a long distance every day and night, continuously hauling agricultural products from the north to the big cities and from the factory stuff from the big cities to the north. So she talked one of the captains of the freighter to take us with him to Friesland. It's the northern province. And when we got there early the following morning, uh, she had it all planned out. We would find a place to sleep at night, and the farms there were pretty well scattered, and they were all had one thing in common. They had a red brick, red roof barn, and they kept their gear, in downstairs. The bigger ones even had a horse stables and stuff. And upstairs, they stored their grains and their hays and stuff. And so we would find a barn and sleep upstairs on whatever was there. The following morning, we would get up early because we did not want the farmer to get into trouble because hiding Jews was punishable by going to the camps themselves. What we would do, we watched where the farm hands, went to work in the fields. Uh, in Holland, they grew their own grass to make hay. They didn't use anything else but grass because grass grows natural in Holland. It's the national wheat. And the reason it grows so quickly and everything, most of Holland is below sea level. So the ground is always wet. And that stuff grows. So anyway, they had people going to work in the fields, and they climbed on a horse and a wagon. Uh, there were no mechanical vehicles or motorized vehicles because there was no gas. So we just followed the wagon with the most workers on it. And when they got to the field, they got out and went to work, and we stayed with the wagon. And we watched out for German patrols. And they were easy to spot because in Holland, like I said, it's below sea level and very flat, except for the highways and the roads. They build up on dikes. And so you could see a vehicle, a long ways off. And if they were motorized, we knew they were Germans because they're the only ones that had gasoline. And then we'd act like they're putting things in the wagon, taking stuff out of the wagon and stuff like that. And we got away with that. But then came the most dangerous part of the day. That is when the workers went back to the farm. We could not count on all of them being sympathetic. So if they got to the farm and they climbed on their bicycle and went to report our authority because there was a bounty on the Jews, so we leave the area. We never spent the night in the same area we spent the day. We'd leave the area, so by the time if anything did happen, we were long gone. And then we'd start over again, looking for a place to sleep. And we got away with that uh, for some time. We couldn't go to the stores and buy anything, so we depended on what we could find. And in the beginning, we would, at night before going to bed, we would raid the vegetable gardens of the farm and take whatever is there. But The farmers didn't like that because they grew vegetables for their own consumption, not for the market. So they were limited. And the reason we found out they didn't like it, they stopped putting barbed wire around it. So we didn't want them to get mad at us, so we quit doing that. Another thing we ate in the mornings when we left the barn, we always found grain laying on the four kernels of grain, different kind of wheat, corn, not corn, but uh, some of the other grains, and we'd fill our pockets. And so when we got hungry, we'd just take some out of our pocket, blew the dirt out of it, and ate that. And that worked fine. But my sister decided we wanted some other stuff. We needed to eat some protein. So she decided we eat eggs. And of course, we couldn't rob the farmers because it would be the same effect. So she decided we eat bird eggs because in Holland, in the farmland here, you have ditches to feed the water to the field. There, they have the ditches for drainage of the fields. The fields are leveled so they drain off. And these little channels then feed into the bigger, and then the mills. In the old days, now they use electric pumps, but there used to be the windmills would take that water and push up into the main canals, and from there they push it up in the rivers. And on the side of those ditches, they had birds' nests, and so the we take those birds' nests and take the egg out of that. And the thing is, we didn't have a way to cook it or fry it, so my sister told me how to eat raw eggs. You take an egg and cup it, and then take it like a ballpoint pen and tap a little hole in it, put your finger over the hole, tap a little bigger hole on that side, put your lips over it, and suck the egg out. Well, the best thing to use is a ballpoint pen. Of course, we didn't have ballpoint pens then, so we used a little twig. And the first time I tried that, I got that second hole in there, and I got it up to here, and the stench. Those birds fed on fish. I got that egg here, and I almost gagged. And my sister said, well, you dummy, you're supposed to take the other hand and hold your nose. Well, I tried that, and it didn't help much. But she made me eat one egg a week. And another thing we ate a lot of is sugar beets. Those farmers grew a lot of sugar beets, and when they harvest them, they pile them up in the field, and they slowly haul them out from there. So we'd take one of those sugar beets and cut the skin off and slice it up, and we ate one sugar beet or less as 3 days, and they had a lot of nourishment. There's a lot of sugar. So after the war, we found out why they had all those sugar beets, and one thing is they fed them to the pigs to fatten them up faster for slaughter, and other thing is they sold them to the candy companies for the sugar. So we ate that, and and we got along like that. And then one night, uh, we were looking for a place to sleep. It was on a weekend. It had been raining. It was dark outside, clouds, and we were walking through the fields. And all of a sudden, my sister grabbed my arm and squeezed. That was our signal. If you thought of any danger in a wet, level country, you don't want to say shh or stop. That you can hear that a mile away. So that was our. So we stopped, and she whispered to me, she said, "Look up ahead. There's a caravan up there." And on the elevated road, there was we could see the outline of trucks. And at the head of the column, we could see some glows and some laughter. Evidently, we had come up on a German convoy taking food and stuff like that to Germany. And they were taking a smoke break. So I turned around to leave, but she grabbed me and she said, "I wonder what's in those trucks." I said, "I don't care." But anyway, she was in charge, so we proceeded to the road, and we climbed up on the side up to the road level. And when we got there, we went by the last truck. She went to the front portion, a typical military truck with the canvas over it, and she went to the forward portion, and I went to the back, and I went underneath that canvas with my hands and felt her out, and I got a hold of something, but I couldn't get it out. The canvas was too tight, and I kept trying, and I had a suspicion of what I had, and I really wanted that, and so. Uh, After a while, my sister came over and she says, "They're breaking up. Let's get out of here." I said, "I got a hold of something. I can't get it out." So she pulled on the canvas, and it finally came out. And then we turned around and we could hear footsteps. So dummy us, that hill we had so carefully climbed upon, we thought we could just walk down. And of course, the first step we took, we tumbled head over heels and landed in the drainage ditch. And it had about a foot to 14 inches of water in it, not much. And when we came up, I started laughing, and my sister didn't think that was the thing to do, so she grabbed me by the back of my head and pushed it under water. And when she let go, I realized I better be quiet. And we laid there until the trucks moved out, and then we found a place to sleep. And the uh, following morning, we took inventory of what we had. Well, I had a wheel of cheese. I mean, that big. And my sister had a bag of coffee beans. And we ate off of that cheese. We gave someone to other that were hiding in the area and shared with them some. But my sister and her coffee beans, uh, they were useless to us. We didn't, and kids didn't drink coffee in Holland. So, but coffee doesn't grow in Europe. The coffee evidently had come from South America by submarine to the harbor in Rotterdam and was being transported to the German high command or something. So my sister, she says, it's worth something. So the following day, she borrowed the raincoat from one of the farm workers. She could have talked him into giving her the farm, but she was real. She was a pretty girl, petite but pretty. And she had been going to school where Dad had graduated. She wanted to become an athletic instructor, and so uh, she put on that raincoat and put that coffee underneath, and she took me to a field and put me by a haystack, and she told me to stay there until she got back. And she went to the city. And after she left, I got scared. What happened if they caught her and I'd be there without her, and I didn't know what to do. So finally, late afternoon, she came back and she started telling me what had happened. And I said, "Before you finish, let's make a deal. We're not playing this again." I said, "We don't separate." And she agreed to that. And she had gone to the town, and they had a school made into a German garrison. And she went there and got a hold of the guy that was in charge of the officers' mess. And she told him, she said, "I can get a hold of a bag of coffee beans. Are you willing to make a trade?" Of course he was. He'd love to serve the real coffee to the guy. The substitute coffee there was burned and ground wheat, and it was nothing like coffee. But so she came back and she had not loaves of bread, but slices of bread and stuff like that, pudding powder and lots of it. And so that really helped our diet. And The coffee, the pudding powder was an adventure in itself because they were different from the pudding powders today. I know when Mom made pudding, she put milk uh, on the stove and brought it to a boil and put in the pudding powder and stirred and then turned the heat off and kept stirring. And then finally she took it out and put it on the concrete floor underneath the kitchen sink. And the following morning we had pudding. Well, we didn't have any of that. We got a hold of a couple of, I don't remember what kind of buckets they were, but they were, and we filled them with water out of the drainage ditch, and we put pudding powder in it, and we stirred and stirred. But it was, it became nothing but lumps, you know. So my sister said, well, let's leave them here. And we left the area, we hit the buckets, and then when we came back to the area about 4 or 5 days later, we got one of those buckets out, and it had settled some. It was still lumpy, so we stirred it some more, and we ate off of that. People ask me, you know, hey, that sounds like fun, you know, great adventure. Well, we lived like that for 2 years, and we didn't know what was going on in the world. We were completely isolated. We saw planes go over back and forth, but so we knew the war was still on, and we had no way to shower or anything like that, and the drainage ditches were not very clean water. Um, I wore shorts because in Holland, kids under 14 did not wear long pants. Uh, I don't know why, but I remember in wintertime, Mom would get me ready for school. She'd put on my shirt and a sweater over it and a wool cap, wool shawl, and Bermuda shorts. uh, but anyway, we had no spare clothing or anything like that. So after 2 years, we made a mistake. One, I keep saying rainy weekend. Uh, Rain is coming in Holland as sunshine is in Arizona. And we'd been messing around looking for a place to hide. And then we finally found a barn, and we went inside, and we just went up the ladder, and right by there was straw. We just conked out. Well, the following morning early, I'm a light sleeper. I still am. I woke up to a strange noise. So another thing the uh, attic had in common, all had in common, on one end, they'd have a set of doors going open to nowhere with a beam sticking out for a block and tackle to hoist things up to the attic. And the attic we were in was maybe 1.5 times the size of this room. And I jumped up and I headed for those doors, and then I noticed there were over a dozen other people sleeping there. Uh, and they'd been there for 2 and 3 weeks. And you don't get away with that. Somebody's going to collect the bounty. So I got to those doors, I opened it up, and I saw 3 German Army Turks coming right at us. So I turned around, got to my sister, and I said, let's get out of here. They're coming. So we headed down the stairwell, and about halfway down, I hollered back up to the rest of them. I wanted to make sure we got out of there first. So we got out down, and we started running. I don't know why. Where are you going to go? So, but anyway, we were running, and then the gunfire started. And I looked over my shoulder where my sister had been running, and she was no longer there. So I I kept on running, and then I remember running on a narrow arrowway between 2 buildings, and all of a sudden something hit my leg, and I went down. And I laid there and I looked at my leg, and there was a little bit of blood, but not much. And later it was determined I'd been hit by a ricochet bullet. So I decided to get up again, but then I looked right into the barrel of a rifle of a soldier standing there, and he took me to where those trucks were and dropped me off there. And then after a while, the gunfire stopped, and I was devastated by that because had they shot my sister. So at the end of the day, they hauled us off, and they took us to one of the two processing camps. Uh, One of them was Westerbork, where the Franks went. That was the bigger of the two. The other one was Vught, which was a combination processing camp and uh, concentration camp. The concentration part of it was primarily for political prisoners. But anyway, we went there, and the following weekend, they hauled us out of there. At Westerbork, they hauled trainloads out every twice a week, and Vught was once a week. And from Mount, they didn't take those trains to Auschwitz like they did at the other camp. They went to Mauthausen. So they took us to the platform, and we walked there, but the cattle cars were there. We walked here, and I looked between the cattle cars, and there was another platform and another train, and that platform had nothing but women on it. And all of a sudden, I saw my sister. And man, I was so happy. So I hauled it out as long as I can. But she didn't hear me. And by the time I could haul her again, the guard had hit me in the back with the rifle butt, knocked me down. So anyway, they put us in those cattle cars, and they put us in there so tight, uh, you couldn't move. I went in there with my arms besides and I couldn't even reach up and touch my nose. And the guy in front of me was much bigger than me. Everybody was bigger than me, but uh, I had my nose right in his shoulder blade, and that's where they stayed. But I could hear the train on the other platform, but the women had left, and we were still standing there. After the war, we researched that and found out that the night before, the Allies had bombed the railhead into Mauthausen, so they couldn't get in. The train with my sister in had already left, so they sent a message down the line for it to turn south a little earlier, and she ended up at Dachau, the oldest of the camps. And they stopped my train, and then they later sent a message to them and said, take the train to Bergen-Belsen. And then it said, take the last two carloads and drop them off at Papenburg. Well, I was in the next to the last car. So had I been going to Bergen-Belsen, you'd be talking to somebody besides me. Papenburg was one of the Emden camps. That's an area of Germany next to the Dutch border. Uh, they, at the time, it had originally it was organized there for political prisoners, primarily labor unions. But then it quit in 1936. They closed it up, and then they reopened it, when the war started. And again, it was primarily for political prisoners. Um, and they had three camps with Papenburg as the head. The camp I was in was the largest of them, was Westerbork, and the Westerwegen, not Westerbork, but the camp there was a slave labor camp. There were a lot of deaths, but that was due to disease and hunger. And some of the industry there profited from that labor, that free labor. They had shipbuilding, and there were two car manufacturers there. One of them was Mercedes-Benz, and the other one is GMC. They made the European version of a Chevrolet, and but of course, General Motor had no control over it at that time. But I never worked at any of those places. The majority of the work that I performed was in the moor. You know, they have the peat. They dug it out and found out from the encyclopedia that what his intent was is to dig it down and then fill it with farm dirt so they could grow things. There's nothing growing in the moor. So the guys went in there and they dug out the moor, and me and a couple of old guys and stuff like that, we in the crew, we would take those blocks that they dug out and stack them up so that the wind could blow through them and dry them. And then when they got dry so they could be stacked, we put them on barges and they haul them off and use them for fuel. But the biggest thing was to dig that place out. It was miserable. And then the barracks, when we got there, they put me in the first barracks. They just opened the door, shoved me inside, and closed the door. And I remember sitting there all night and thinking, you know, where's my sister? Where's the rest of the family? Why am I here? What did I do so wrong that I deserved it? And I don't know if I cried or not. I most likely did. But the following morning, a whistle blew and the door opened up, and all. And then I could see the barracks. There was nothing there. It was just a one-story barrack, and it had two boards sticking out like that with a walkway. And on that side, it was straw, and that's where about 60 guys were sleeping there. And then everybody fell out, and they had roll call, and then they had the propaganda, how many tons of shipping they had destroyed and how many aircraft they had shot down. And then they went off to work. But during the roll call, if anybody didn't answer the roll, they'd go inside the barracks and see if they were still there, and they were. They were dead. And so they hauled them out. And in different camps, they did different things. In our camp, they had two-wheel garden carts, and they just put them in there and hauled them out. I don't know what they did with them. I never worked on that either. But in other camps, they put them on blankets and haul them into the woods and just dump them there. At Bergen-Belsen, they stacked them between the barracks. Then the first day, they didn't send me off to work. They kept me there and got me ready, you know, to be recognized as a prisoner. They put a yellow stripe down the back of my shirt. That indicated I was a Jew. And in the barracks I was in, there was only one other Jew. The rest of them were all political prisoners, most of them from Belgium and France. And people write about their life in the camp, you know, and the organization of among the prisoners. I didn't find anything like that. Nobody wanted to, because if the guards wanted to mess with me, there's nothing they could do. So they didn't want to be real close. Everybody let's look out for number one. And so we didn't have much to eat either. In the mornings there was no breakfast, but when we went out in the field at early lunchtime, they had somebody, a woman, farm girl or farm elder, come out with a basket with bread, and it was the dark sour dough bread, and coated with lard. and that was it. We get a slice of that, uh, and you drink water just out of the puddles that you find. But the other Jew that was in the barracks with us, when he was on a detail with me, which was very frequently, uh, he wouldn't eat that because of the lard. And every rabbi I've talked to said under the circumstances, but he would. Well, then they didn't eat. The girls, the farmers didn't eat that stuff. So she wanted to get rid of the slice. I was the only kid on the detail, so about maybe twice a week, I had an extra slice of bread, which was a lot. And then when we went back to the barracks, we got dinner, which consisted of what they call potato soup. What it really was is when they boil the potatoes for the guards, they boil them in the skin. And then they took them out, put them on the tables for the guards to eat. And the water that was left over, that was our soup. Now, when they had them, they put some turnip slices in it, but that was it. So a lot of guys that have been there for quite a while were in pretty bad shape. Like I said, it went on like that until the end of the war, which was about 11 months, if I remember right. And then we knew there had been an invasion because all of a sudden, we found an increased amount of airplanes going over. And then one morning we were out for roll call and we could hear a thump, thump. Well, one of the guys had been a French artillery officer, and he told us that we were hearing mortar fire. He said that means that they're within 2 or 3 miles of us. So, and then one morning, a tank came up to the front gate, and we were all excited, and because he didn't have the German markings on him. And while we were watching it, down the road an 88 fired and blew the turret right off of that tank. So that was it. But then a couple of days later, gunfire became closer and closer, and then a tank came through the gate. And the guys in our barracks, they were all rushed to the window to see what was going on. I went over there, but they wouldn't let me in there. So, but then all of a sudden they started all run to the door and started banging the door. That's when I went to the window and I saw a big tank. And then I saw soldiers come from behind the tank. And about that time, the guys in the barracks succeeded in busting the door down. They ran outside, and those soldiers all went back behind the tank. I said, why are they afraid of us? Well, they came back out, and they had a handkerchief. A couple of them wear a gas mask. We didn't have toilet facilities in the barracks, and diarrhea was a very common thing. So when they opened the door, the stench was so much that these soldiers couldn't handle it. But anyway, we were liberated by the British. At first, I had no idea who they were. When they started talking to us, I couldn't understand. The markings on the tank didn't give any indication. So then they fed us, and that was a procedure they learned the hard way. When they went through the earlier liberated camps, these starving prisoners asking for something to eat, and they give, like the good-hearted Americans, what they give them, Hershey bars. And hundreds of them died because the system couldn't handle it. And so when they came to us, they gave us a biscuit about that high, and I put it in my mouth, and I bit down on it, and I broke my teeth. So I thought to myself, I know who they are. They're Canadians. They're giving us hockey pucks. But that wasn't so. They gave us those hard biscuits for a reason, so you wouldn't eat them too fast. It took me, I think, about 2 hours to eat that biscuit. And then later that day, after they take all of our clothes off, and they walked us through a line and sprayed us with a white powder, and that was because of typhus. Uh, we had lice, but we didn't have typhus. But they weren't taking any chances, you know what happened to Bergen-Belsen. So then they gave us some odds and ends piece of clothing to put on, and they gave us another biscuit. But this time they gave us a little cup, a tin cup of lukewarm tea. That was a dead giveaway. There's only one army that goes to battle carrying tea. We were liberated by the British. And then they started hauling. They had taken a school in the city and set up a processing center there, and they took a truckload at a time. Uh, I didn't go on the first truckload. I went later that evening, and some of the guys, it took them about 3 days to take all of the prisoners of Papenburg around. But before that happened, uh, when we were liberated, the British had a problem because our camp commandant was an SS officer that had been wounded, had an artificial leg, and he carried that little dagger, and he liked to carve on prisoners. And so when it opened up, the guys all stormed the administration building, and the British went in after to stop them on what they thought was going to be a massacre. Well, they didn't kill anybody except the commandant. They killed him with his own dagger. And but then they hauled me to the school, and we went. They took a cart with a piece of twine around our neck, and they made all kinds of notations on it. And I came to the station where they took our blood pressure, and the nurse uh, was from Holland. So for the first time, I had an opportunity to talk to somebody that I can understand. And you picked up a few words from the German guards because they make you understand. And so I asked her how things were in Holland. She said, "Oh, things were getting better." And so every day, as we were treated and stuff like that, I made a point always to go see my nurse. And I was there for about 8, 9, or 10 days, I don't remember. And I came to see her one time, and she weighed me and took my blood pressure, and she says, how would you like to go home? I said, that's what I've been waiting for. She said, well, when you came here, we categorized the prisoners in three parts. Uh, those that were too far gone, we sent them to a place where they could die in peace. He said, others we had to send to hospital for treatment. He said, and those we kept here and built up. She said, you were in that category. And she said, you responded real well. You've gained 17 pounds since you've been here. I said, great, how much do I weigh? She said, you're now at 96 pounds. So I was 79 pounds. And I went home and found in the apartment, it actually was my grandma's apartment. Grandma was there and my mom was there. They had survived that attic. Grandma hadn't even gone there. She'd stayed in the apartment because she was not in jeopardy. So, uh, so they were there and I was there. And then maybe the hardest time for Mom came because She would go every day to the railroad station, to the lot where they dropped off the truckloads, and ask people if they knew of anything about the rest of the family. Well, nothing happened. And so after a while, well, about 2 weeks after I got home, an ambulance pulled up to the door, and they brought my sister. She was in bad shape, but she was alive. And she had 11 surgeries on her back, and all they did is pain killing. They cut nerves out and stuff like that. She had three of them in Holland at the time, and the rest of them in the United States. We never thought she could pass a physical well enough to come to the United States, but somehow or other she did. So we came uh, after a lot of this happened. Mom got us together, the three of us, and she says, uh, this is not going to slow down. This is too many empty chairs. She said, I think we ought to try find a country that'll take us and start a new life. So she put us in for the United States, Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, and one other. But anyway, New Zealand responded real quick. And when we were still talking about going there, came acceptance for the United States. And Mom had a brother that had left for the United States a long time ago. He was in the United States. So we had somebody we could go to. So we decided to wait for the United States. It had a long processing company. But Mom got us together, and she says, now, uh, the good Lord had saved us, she said, and given us a new home and a new life. So let's not talk about the war anymore. So we agreed to that, and then we came to the United States. Well, she was the first one to blow it. When I was in training in South Carolina, I called her up, and she says, how are you doing? I said, I lost 15 pounds. She said, you sick? I said, no. I said, I was a little heavy, so I went on a diet. She said, you did what? I said, I went on a diet. She said, well, that's just like you. For a long time, there was nothing to eat. You almost starved to death. And the good Lord takes you clear across the ocean where land there is plenty, and now you refuse to eat. None of us spoke. She spoke a few words English. I didn't speak any. But right from the beginning, she pushed, you know, quit thinking in Dutch, quit talking Dutch. And even when we talk now, we talk English. And that's been all the way through. She's been pushing that, pushing that. And our oldest sister was a linguist. She spoke 7 languages. And that, she said, that's what keeps me having an accent, her. She said, I cannot think. I think in Dutch, but then I have to talk English, talk French, and stuff like that. And she said, and that's what gives you your accent. So even today, people that have been here longer than I have, they have a heavy accent because they think in their own home country language. After I came, before I could speak English, I got a letter, and it looked official because it had a seal of the United States as a return address. So I took it to the landlord, who had been in Germany and spoke some German, and I could understand some German. So I took it to him, and he opened it up and started laughing. I said, "What's so funny?" He said, "You've been drafted." So I was drafted, and after basic training, they were going to ship me to Germany. And boy, that really set me off. So I went to see the first sergeant and then the commander, and he sent me to see a psychologist. And she was terrific. And but she took me to the regimental commander, and he said, "Sir, I don't think it'd be a good idea to send this man to Germany with a loaded rifle." Because at the time, I was still very, anything German was, but after they took me off of that order and gave me orders to go to Korea instead, she talked to me. And the biggest help I had since I've been in the United States. She said, "Quit the hate." She said, "If you're going to go the rest of your life hating people, he won. Because he may not have taken your body, but he's got your soul." He said, "Don't let that idiot dictate how you're going to live the rest of your life." For a long years, I actually hated Germans. Uh, that was a common thing because I met another friend of my dad's that I knew, and he had two sons. Now he died over there, but the two sons and their mom came to the United States. Uh, if they'd have come early, they would have been football players. I mean, they were like 6'6", 6'5", maybe, big, strong guys. And the dad had a contracting job in Holland. The transportation of things is by barge, rather than truck. And their job, they would contract out unloading the barges, and particularly they do this potatoes. And they had one of the boys stand in the bottom of the barge, take a bag of potatoes, handing it up to his son on the deck, his brother on the deck, who then handed it to his dad, who'd put it on the wagons. I mean, they were brutes. Can you imagine standing all day with bags of potatoes? And I remember they got into trouble one time. They were not the smartest guys. They were redheads, and we went to a soccer game, and somebody in the audience started talking German, and one of those two guys, he he went over to the man and he said, in his broken English, "We're in the United States, speak English." And the main thing that caused that is his hatred for Jews because they killed his dad. For Germans. Yeah, he hated the Germans. So the guy gave him some lip, so he hit the guy, knocked him cold. So the police came and arrested him. And I remember going in to testify, what was happening. And I said, I kind of feel the same way. It bothers me uh, to hear the German language. And at the time, it doesn't bother me anymore, but at the time, for quite a while, it bothered me to hear the German language because I always associated it with the war. Our youngest son in the early 80s, he was a singer and he sang at Tivoli Gardens. And my wife went there to pick him up. He had always thinking, but we decided to go. He wanted us to come and go to Tivoli Gardens. And we did. And we flew to Amsterdam, and from there we took the train to Copenhagen. Well, in the train, we had a compartment. But I noticed in the walkway there was a train man in the same uniform they wore during World War II. And I thought, I'm going to put myself on trial. I got up and I went in that hallway, and started talking to the guy. And he spoke some English, so we talked. And I had no ill feelings. You know, it was so great. And my sister uh, came to also to go, her and her husband. And one night, traveling by Volkswagen bus, we stopped in a little German farming community for the night, and we got uh, two rooms, you know, one for my sister and her husband, one for us. We got our rooms. We had dinner, went to our room, and after dark, but we noticed there were some farmers outside under our window were talking. You know, we couldn't understand a lot, but then they broke up. Heil Hitler. My sister came, she didn't even knock, she just stormed into my room. She said, "Did you hear that?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Nazism is alive and well in Germany." When I really opened up was in 96. And I had just retired, and the Anne Frank exhibit came to town. Well, one of the guys affiliated with that knew me. We knew each other. He was a good friend of my dad's. And he got a hold of me. He said, "You know, we'd like you to come work here and talk to the kids as they await to go through." I said, "Well, I did it, you know." And one of the first groups I was addressing, and all of a sudden I realized in the back, way in the back, was my grandson. He had never heard about this before, and neither had his dad. You know, nobody knew about it. I kept it complete to myself. Burden had taken away from me, you know, uh, that some other people knew what I went through, and uh, but I didn't even tell my wife until well after we were married. Uh, but that I'm glad I did. And my sister, she will not talk about her time in the camp. She's still alive. She's 97 years old. Uh, she's still sharp. She has trouble talking. We talk on the phone uh, maybe 5 minutes, and then her voice gives out. But her thinking is still, she'll talk to me about the time we were in hiding, but she will not talk to me about what happened to her in the camp. And when Steven Spielberg the organization did the interviews, she turned it down, and she finally got a notice that Steven Spielberg would like to meet with her. She wouldn't do that. So she never told anybody. But she's another success story because she met a fellow, a survivor, and they married. Of course, my sister couldn't have any children. Uh, but he had a sister, her and her husband, in the early part of the war, had a baby. And neighbors, they lived in an apartment house, and a couple of the neighbors told them, "Don't have that child in your apartment. Do not have any evidence of a child in your apartment. Bring the child, have the child, bring the child to our to keep the bottles and diapers, everything in our place." And they did. And so they came for the couple, and they took them, and they perished. But when the girl's uncle, the mother's brother, married my sister, they adopted that baby. Of course, she was already grown. I think she was 6 or 7 years old by the time that happened. And that gal had 11 children. So my sister has, and she's been very fortunate. Her husband passed away, but one of her granddaughters married a guy that financially was well off. So she has an apartment in that house. She has her own bathroom, her own TV, her own telephone, and everything. She has dinner with the family, but that's it. And so they're taking well care of her. They take her to the barber to have her hair done and everything. And we still talk about 2 or 3 times a week. But I'm grateful to my sister for what happened during the war, but also after when we came here. I, we never practiced the Jewish religion, but I feel closer to the Jewish community here now, because of what happened. Uh, I have some rabbis I've talked to, and uh, in fact, 3 of the rabbis pronounced me an honorary Jew. What that means, the but it doesn't bother me. I judge people by the way they treat me rather than what their religion is. Most religions teach things happen because God wants them to happen that way. I can't bring myself to believe that a true God would allow something like that to happen. Uh, no way. And even some of the people that are doing things today, he allows it. These mass shootings and stuff like that. Um, I can't believe that there is a God that plans everything, here on earth. If there is such a God, he doesn't do that. He lets us do our own thing totally. Uh, like uh, I heard I've refereed some volleyball, and I heard a team captain of a religious team during the game prayed with the guys so they could win. Well, what about the other team? You make God choose between 2 teams. To me, it just doesn't make sense. So I am not a very religious man. I think the kids need to know about this. They need to know how dangerous certain things can be because people have forgotten. Uh, just off the bat, I've always voted Republican. But when the Republican Party started to worship a person like they did, that's scary because if you go to history, any country that did that ended up in a dictatorship or totalitarian system of government anyway, and was destroyed. You can go all the way back to Rome, to Hitler. Hitler was elected, but when he's got in, he became totalitarian. And Putin is elected over and over again, but he's a totalitarian system now. And I don't like that, and it's scary. Well, you see it. You see it now. There's anti-Semitism is, and if it isn't the Jews, it's some other. It never stopped. You have mass executions in Africa and stuff like that. Uh, the only way it would stop, in my opinion, is the 2 most evil things on earth. If we get rid of those, number 1 is greed, the cause of every war, and number 2 is prejudice. And the prejudice is the same thing. It's you're against somebody else because you think you're better. And you know why do people have to be that way? There's enough on earth for everybody. All we need to do is get along. And we can't do it. because of greed. You know, these guys that making billions of dollars a year, they want more, they want more, they want more. If you're a believer in the Bible, remember one commandment is there, love one another. And I think that's the truth. You know, let's love one another. You know, it's not that hard.